Yeah, I know. Don't we all, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, you're 100% right. I don't think Bitcoin's going away. I think especially, first of all, I think regulation is needed, and I think it will be good regulation. It's Yeah, yeah, very true. Although I do think it's worth mentioning that you have a much higher, and I think I've seen stats on this, a much higher percentage of the US population is now invested than they ever have been before. Part of that happened, by the way, just in the last, since COVID, right? So many people, just they were home, they didn't know what else to do. Oh, let's get into trading. Crypto is great. Stocks are great. GameStop, AMC. So I do think that it's more tied directly to the economy, meaning if you see a lot of people with 20, 30, 40% losses in their investment accounts, they're going to spend less money, which then slows the economy as well. Yeah, yeah. And I just brought up the Qs chart because this was a level that I actually tweeted about a few days ago, this 300 level. You can see the beautiful kind of confluence of levels here, pivot, 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 and then low pivot here. And you're getting this nice little bounce today on the Qs. Not a huge bounce, but I mean, we are up now over 2%, almost 2.5% on the QQQ. So I do think that that's worth keeping an eye on. It's just a short-term level for me, but I did pick up quite a few of these kind of beaten down tech names. And by the way, I mean, have you seen some of these tech names? They've just been absolutely demolished to points that like even I am surprised at. I mean, the first 70% I was like, okay, that was needed, and now it's like at 80, 85%. I'm like, okay, this is pretty crazy now. Wild, man. I'll tell you, one of the things I'm watching very closely, and I know you get these out very quickly, so it's worth discussing, is the CPI number tomorrow. I think the
Yeah.
CPI number is going to be epically big for this market. The market wants to see peak inflation. If we get a slightly lower than like 8% print on that CPI, the market will rejoice. If it's higher, watch out. Right. And here's the 10-year yield chart. And you can see we broke out. But my guess is we're going to retrace and re-see this line before we make our next move up. But been a remarkable move in the 10-year, the 20-year, the 30-year. I mean, people with mortgages, like you're saying, I mean, it is just insane how quickly the bond market has done its thing and pushed yields up here. But again, it is starting to pull back. 10 years back below 3% now. Yeah, I know. Don't we all, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, you're 100% right. I don't think Bitcoin's going away. I think especially, first of all, I think regulation is needed, and I think it will be good regulation. It's not to say that every rule is going to be perfect. We know the government by far is not perfect, but I do think that there's enough jobs that are built on the blockchain and cryptocurrency, and even Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, where they're going to get into stuff, NFTs. I mean, there's enough jobs where the politicians won't regulate it out of existence. They want it to stay around, and that's ultimately going to be a good thing. And I think I've said this before, but you have to get Bitcoin and cryptos to the point where more people feel comfortable investing. So what does that mean? Well, one of the reasons why I don't put a lot of money in cryptos or in my crypto account individually is because if it gets stolen out because I clicked on a link I didn't mean to, well, guess what? It's gone for good, right? Versus FDIC insurance with stock accounts and banking accounts. So there has to be certain things done where a pension fund feels comfortable putting $1 billion in Bitcoin or crypto, where mom and pop that are 85 years old, it's part of their allocation of their retirement. That type of thing has to happen, and we do need the government to come in and lay down some ground rules. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And in all fairness, you see this almost every cycle. Like if you look at the .coms, there were a lot of people that it took 5-10 years for them to reinvest in the stock market. And then unfortunately, what ends up happening is they reinvested in 2007 when it got like the market would never go down. And then we know 2008, 2009 happened. And then the same thing. I mean, for years after 2009, every year, 2010, 11, 12, 13, it was always, where are all the small investors? They're not back in the market yet. Well, guess what? COVID brought them back in when the markets just continued to go up. When we only had 3% corrections for like a year, that was the biggest drawdown for over a year. It brought people in because they thought they couldn't lose, right? It's the easy money train. And then guess what happens? It's the top. And here we go again, and again, people have to start to, and this is hard to, people just won't realize this, but you have to shape your mind to buy the fear and sell the greed versus the opposite, which is what human emotion makes you do. Absolutely. And I think it's important for people to recognize that, I mean, if we are witnessing a dot-com-ish type scenario, then where crypto's going is to demolish, 90+% of all the cryptos will essentially cease to exist, which is probably healthy for the system, right? I think the best of breed will survive and they'll thrive just like Amazon did back in dot-coms. And obviously it's gone way, way higher than its highs back then. But, I think there's like 19,000+ cryptos at this point. There's no reason for it, no reason whatsoever. And it's not healthy for the system, frankly. It's kind of like too much cancer in the system, if you will, where you have to kind of get rid of it. You want the best to survive and thrive. Very dark. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm thinking whether, if you're someone like me, and we just talked about it earlier, where, you have to at least see the S&P get back to that pre-COVID level. Well, that's still quite a ways away, right? I mean, you're still talking 10+% just to get to those levels. And if the NASDAQ continues down with that, the impact on the NASDAQ we know is great on cryptocurrency, which then spells even more downside in the cryptos potentially. Then you have to think that that's the angle of where this ultimately ends. The best way to regulate emotion is by doing proper share size. And I'm sure you did, Greg, in terms of when you go into AVAX and you leverage 10 times, you're going to be, every tick you're going to be freaking out. But when you do it with the proper allocation, like 5% of your portfolio, well, then you know what? Yeah, you might make decent money if it does, but you're not going to freak out about it. So you really then can rely on the real thought process through it, not kind of fear. You get, and I think in those situations, it becomes, just smart to be safe, right? Because if it does go away, you lose everything, versus if you're wrong on an entry, maybe it drops another 10 or 20%. But if all of a sudden, let's say it gets halted and you can't even, you just don't know in those scenarios. So
yeah, that one was a little tricky for me. But AVAX, I know that's not going anywhere. Long term, that's a decent asset. It's got a lot of support where it's at right now. So I felt
look at the support on AVAX. I actually picked up something down here too. I mean, this is just such a good level for at least a near term bounce. I mean, I actually picked up some Solana, same thing. I mean, I love multiple trend lines, pivot low. We went right there. Plus you had this extra support right here. Even Polkadot, take a look at Polkadot. I picked this up yesterday, but look at this little pivot low right here, hits it perfectly. And then look at that bounce, over 10% already just there on that bounce. So again, even if we are in a bear market, and I think you'd agree with this, is that there's still lots of opportunity. It's the more volatility there is, the more opportunity, as long as you know what you're doing. Me, it's when I see no one talking or even going near it. Like literally, and I still remember this in 2017, is CNBC used to have the Bitcoin ticker on the bottom of their screen. And in 2018, when it was basically down below 10,000, they took it away and no one talked about it. And that was the time to start accumulating. And I do think that I've said this for a long time, and it warrants reiteration, is that there will be a pivot point where inflation comes down. I don't think back to 2%, but let's say it's 5%. And unemployment starts to spike due to a recession and goes to 7 or 8 or 9%. And there will be a point, even with 5% inflation, that the Fed turns the spigot on again and starts printing. Yeah. And by the way, I'm a big fan of that thought process. If we were 30 years ago, problem is the Fed has had the markets on and the economy on life support and kept on resuscitating over and over again, that at this point, I mean, if they just stepped away, the downside would be cataclysmic, in my opinion. It would be, it would be healthy, but it would be so nasty. And I don't think they have the stomach for it. And I certainly don't think the politicians have the stomach for it.